Hello and welcome to Recap the podcast with me, Lucy Wheeler. Recap stands for Research in Education, Child Development and Parenting, and our mission is to embrace everyone and make everyone feel at home and part of a supportive community. Here on the podcast, you will find stories from parents, child development professionals, researchers, early childhood educators, and many, many more. So pop on those headphones while you walk the dog, grab a snippet during your lunch break or while your baby sleeps, and enjoy listening to some incredible stories from some truly amazing people. Welcome to Recap. Hello and a huge warm welcome to my guest today, Dr Kay Aaronricks, who I'm very excited to chat to about all things related to childminding. So before we head into that, I just want to tell you a little bit more about our guest. Dr Kay Aaronricks is a mum of two and the head of the School of Education at Anglia Ruskin University. She is so incredibly passionate about childminding and all things early years. I cannot wait to chat more about the wonderful work she's doing for Childminders. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to the podcast Dr Kay Aaronricks. How are you doing today?
Hi, Lucy. Thanks so much for inviting me on today. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you.
I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. For those listening, a little background. Kay was actually my personal tutor at university when I was doing my undergraduate degree. And throughout my time studying there, Kay went from being my tutor and lecturer to deputy head of school and now head of school, which is amazing. And I went from being a student there to now working alongside you as a colleague in the School of Education. So I feel like it's been really lovely to not only, acknowledge my own progress and development, but also yours. I feel like we've grown a little bit together, albeit in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so lovely. And that's what education's about, isn't it, really? And you were one of my first students on my first cohort of teaching at Anglia Ruskin. And I
Oh,
think I've clapped
was
you across
I?
the stage for your graduation twice now.
Yes.
So it's been really nice to see you come through and be working in the
Oh,
school now as well. It's fantastic.
yeah, it was lovely. And hopefully it'll be a third time as well when I finish my doctorate.
Yes, there's no hopefully, it will be. I'm ready and waiting.
I remember you studying for your doctorate while I was actually there as a student, and I remember seeing you practice your presentations and share your research as you went along. And it's so nice that I now get to have you here today talking about it. It feels like a bit of a full circle moment.
Oh, thank you, Lucy. And you never know. One day I might be talking to you about your research.
I'm going to hold you to that. Right. Firstly, let's go back and talk about becoming a parent, because you are a mum of two children, one of who is a teen and the other is now an adult. So how did you find becoming a first-time mum and then deciding to go on and have a second child?
Yeah, thank you. So I am a mum to two wonderful children. My daughter, I'm going to feel old now. My daughter is 24 and my son is 17. So being a mum, I think, is just an amazing thing. And I don't think that really there is any way that I could describe it that could properly do it justice. It is just such an enormous
Mm,
kind of thing in your life, isn't it? And I suppose
yeah,
I would say that being a mum, you have to be realistic. Being a mum is really tough, but it is
yeah,
also the most incredible job, I think. And those two things happen in equal measure, don't they?
absolutely.
Yeah, the stakes are high, aren't they? You are literally holding a life in your hand when your child is born,
Yeah,
and that's kind of indescribable, really. I think one of the funny things for me is I think every mother is given all of this advice, isn't she, at the beginning when you have your
yeah,
child. And I was given loads of advice in the beginning, kind of make the most of it because it goes really fast and
yeah.
parenting is difficult, but that usually means that you're doing it right. Uh, but no one can really kind of prepare you for that overwhelming sort of realization that you are
Yeah,
responsible for this little person. And also you're doing that in a world that can also be quite crazy and busy and tough and wonderful all at the
yeah.
same time. And it's funny, even though my daughter will be 25 this year, she is still my
Mhm.
little girl. and my son
Yeah.
is going to be 18 this year. So for me, I'm just sort of getting to the stage in the parenting journey now of having two adult children, which is weird. You know, after 25 years of being a parent, they don't need
Yeah.
me in the same way that they used to when they were little, which, you know, is
Yeah.
very it's very different. But now we are all trying to be adults together. And actually, that's really wonderful too. They make me laugh a lot, and they are, you know, they're there for me now. And we've got this really close relationship, which I'm very lucky to have. But I
Yeah.
suppose being a first time mum, I did life a little bit differently. So I became a mum quite young. I had already started as a student at Anglia Ruskin University when I was 18, and I had
Okay.
started to study children's nursing. Originally, I had
All right.
always known during school that I wanted to work with children, but I had tailored my school education, my GCSEs and my A levels, towards nursing. Um,
Right.
but then but then when it actually came to it and I started on the course, I struggled to engage, and I sort of started to realize that it wasn't really the right course for me, and I sort of had a bit of a life crisis time. And I
Yeah.
think, you know, working in HE now, I see this quite a lot, and I think that we're quite quick to forget and underestimate really the enormity of how young people feel when they leave school. You
Yeah.
know, you've been institutionalized for so long in education, and you will have views on this because, you know, you're obviously
Yeah.
talking about home schooling and education. But
Mm.
for children that stayed in school, it can, and we hope that it will be, a safe and sort of structured place to be. So what happens then is when you step outside of that for the very first time into this world where you thought that you wanted to go in a certain direction, and suddenly you
Yeah.
realize that it wasn't quite what you wanted, it can be quite a scary place to be. So
Mm.
anyway,
Absolutely.
I suddenly realized that children's nursing wasn't for me, and then I had my daughter. So I was 19, and she, along with my son now, I can say, have absolutely made me the person that I am today. I think we talk a lot about how parenting is amazing, and you love them and you raise them and you do the best that you can. But really, for me, the powerful thing about having a child is in how they change you.
Yeah.
And I've practically grown up with my daughter, and she and my son have given me so much in my adult life. They have taught me a strength and a resilience that I didn't even know was possible. And
Yeah.
you know, they've made me insane and they've kept me sane in equal measure. And I think, you know, you love your children unconditionally, but they also give you an unconditional love that I think is a very special thing. And it can often be taken for granted.
Yeah.
And my children, you know, they have just been so supportive and patient with my constant studying. And I have studied and worked, you know, mostly at the same time their entire
Yeah.
lives. So being a mum in the middle of all of that is exhausting, but it's so
Tough. Yeah.
rewarding. Yeah, exactly. And I think it kind of goes back to the advice that I was given at the beginning, in that it goes so fast. And it's really,
Yeah.
for me being a mum, it's really important to just embrace the time. And, you know, that's really hard to do. We're in a world where we're always planning for the next steps, we're worrying
It's
about
so fast
tomorrow.
moving, isn't it?
Exactly. Work is busy, we're tired, we've got loads to do. We're
Yeah.
constantly thinking about, you know, what our children need next and all of that kind of stuff. But if we're careful, we can just miss, you know, enjoying
Yeah.
and valuing what they're doing now. And then before you know it, they are 25 and I feel really old.
you don't look really old.
Thanks.
Oh, it actually feels a bit emotional listening to you describe it like that. Like I feel like we align on a lot of things that you've just said. And like I had my daughter, I fell pregnant with Gracie when I was 19, and
Yeah,
so I had her when I just turned 20. But when you like I feel like right now I'm navigating a totally alien part of parenting for me, because she's 17, she's going to be 18 this year, and I feel
yeah,
like 17 is a real no man's land, because she's not quite a child anymore, but she's not quite an adult yet either. So navigating that bit in between of like, I'm still responsible for you, but I want to give you that independence. Like we were saying the other day, it's outrageous that she's now driving, but because she's not 18, she can't have the payment for her insurance come out of her bank account. It has to come out of my bank account, and then she has to pay me the money for insurance. But she's old enough to have a driving license, and she's old enough to do other stuff, but she's not quite old enough and trusted enough to have the insurance payment come out of her bank account. It's outrageous. This
I
kind
know.
of
It's
no
crazy,
man's
isn't
land
it?
of,
That, yeah,
it's such a weird age. And also, do you know what I struggle with this age, that I didn't anticipate, is the fact that when they're coming up to 18 years old, and they don't need you anymore, and I really struggle with that kind of letting go of being like the main responsible parent. Like she's off doing things that she's supposed to be doing, and she's now working, and like I say, she's driving, things like that, and I'm still that parent on the edge of my seat, like tracking her on Life 360, and where is she going and what is she doing, and it's kind of that middle ground of like I say, being a child and being an adult. But I didn't think that I would struggle so much with kind of cutting those strings, as they say, and letting her be free, because I've always encouraged her to be independent. But knowing that in a few months' time she's a fully fledged adult, like I've found that really struggling over that last year, I think, of parenting.
yeah, absolutely. And I think we talk a lot, don't we, about children's early years and the different stages that they go through. And,
Yeah,
we learn a lot about that, but that continues all the way through and even beyond when they're
yeah,
18. My daughter being 25, we are still going through different phases of our relationships. And there's sometimes where she needs me more than she did previously for one reason or another.
yeah,
And it's kind of, I think that's what I mean about you just learn how to have that relationship in a different way. You learn how to be a
yeah,
mum with them, and then you sort of learn how to be a friend with them, and then you learn how to be that sort of foundational person that's just there when they need you. And even though you're not talking to them necessarily every day, they are able to do what they need to do and live their lives and do these amazing things, because they've got the
yeah.
security of knowing that you're there in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. That's reassured me. Thank you. The thought of her being kind of,
Yeah,
yeah,
17, 18 is weird. And, they can have their
yeah.
own family at the age of 16, but they can't get a credit card until they're 18 or buy a house. It's all a little
It's
bit backwards in the
crazy,
world
isn't
that we
it?
live in.
Yeah. Oh my word, absolutely. Sometimes just to kind of freak me out a little bit, she'll sometimes say to me, "I'm only like 18 months off of when you feel pregnant with me." I'm like, "No, not yet." But it's true. But obviously, we
Yeah,
live completely different lives. She's very career focused at her age now, where I was less career focused at that age, and more so now. So I mean, we lead totally different lives. But putting that into perspective, and her saying that to me, well, Mum, it was only 18 months time, and you were pregnant with me, and I think, oh my goodness, like.
yeah.
That sounds so young, but at the time when I had her, I was, I'd moved out, I was working, I was in a relationship, like it was fine, but it just, I don't know. It's perspective, isn't it? Everything comes down to
It
perspective.
is. And I think it gives you, yeah, and it gives you a new appreciation for your own parents, doesn't it? Because I think we all talk about how,
Yeah.
I think I phoned my mother every year of my daughter's life saying, I'm really sorry for when I was 2. I'm really sorry for when I was 3. And you sort of have a new appreciation of how your parents might have felt when you were
Yeah.
kind of telling them that you were going to be a mum, and they're now grandparents and things like that. So but that's what I mean about, you just have to embrace this life that we have, and just, you know, just kind of, the relationships are the important bit, aren't they?
Yeah. And I think as well, talking about kind of early years, and obviously that's your background and mine as well. And I know that whenever I've worked directly with children and been in the preschools and the nurseries and the reception classes and that, you kind of do embrace them as your children, and you have that kind of relationship building. It's so important to kind of have that relationship with them. And I think it it's similar to that kind of parenting role, but slightly different, because obviously you're not their parent, but there is that element of nurture and love and care that needs to be there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes first underneath everything. You can't even start talking about the areas of learning if you don't have a relationship
Yeah.
with that child, if they don't feel safe to be there with you, if they're not ready to learn and develop and engage in where they are. And it is the relationships that underpin that, absolutely.
Definitely. So you had your children. You also, when your children were little, you also worked as a childminder. So this is where the kind of interest, I'm guessing, around childminding started to come in. So how did you get into that? What made you want to go into working kind of in childcare in the sector?
Yeah, okay. So I've said that I had already started at ARU, had a bit of my crisis, and then I had my daughter in 1999. I was young, but it was it was really lovely. And because of that kind of period of my life, I sort of took some time out just to be at home with her. I had, my life crisis to work through, and it took me a sort of a year or two to work out how to be an adult and a mum at the same time, really.
Yeah.
So then I went back to Anglia Ruskin, and I went through clearing, and I was accepted to study on the early childhood degree. And of course, for me, that was my sort of life-changing educational experience. And ARU had a nursery at that time. It was
Oh,
this wonderful demountable. Yeah, it was up on the field where the medical school is now,
right.
and they were the most caring practitioners. And my daughter absolutely loved going there. So I then spent the time studying child development, and then I picked her up from nursery and I put it into practice
Oh,
every day for those 3 years of my degree. So then after I finished the degree, she had started school. I went to work in a day nursery for a little while,
okay.
in the toddler room. And I can honestly say, I think I threw myself in at the deep end in that job, but but I learned a lot through that experience.
Yeah.
So then my son was born in 2006. So there's a 7-year age difference between both of them. And actually, that's quite interesting because obviously parenting them both was a very different experience.
Yeah.
They're individuals, they need different things from me, and all the complexities that go around that. But although 7 years isn't maybe a particularly significant amount of time, and there's lots of families that have bigger age gaps than that, I think at the time that was, they were both brought up in two quite different times.
Okay.
When I had my daughter, I'd only just got my very first mobile phone. I think it was the Nokia 5110,
Oh,
something like that.
remember
Uh,
those?
yeah, exactly. We still had dial up. You couldn't use the house phone and the internet at the same time. Um, my car had a choke and 4 gears. Saying that, actually, I saw a magazine the other day, and it had the headline of classic cars of the 1980s,
Oh my
which
word.
is really depressing.
Classic.
I know, exactly. Whereas then, to put that in perspective, so my son then was, on the other hand, born in a time when the first iPhone was
Yeah.
about to be introduced, and the world really had sped up in its digital technological developments.
Mm,
So parenting my son was very different from parenting my daughter, and that's one of the most important things about early years, is understanding the context and the world that you're doing
yeah.
doing that in. So ultimately, it was my son that was the main reason that I started childminding. I had been working in the toddler room in a private day nursery, but I wanted to stay at home with him. So I took those skills and I set up my childminding business. And I have to say, I am so glad that I did. I think childminding is it's the one job that I would do again at any point in my life. I think if I lost my job tomorrow, then I would re-register as a childminder. It's just such a fantastic role. I was a childminder for 7 years. So my children were, well, Michael he was about 6 months when I started childminding. And don't get me wrong, the hours are really long, and the responsibility of looking after 3 little ones and 3 school children, and sometimes a couple of children that are over 8 is immense. But it is the most fun and crazy and most rewarding job that you can do. Can I say a bit about what a childminder is? Because I think that's part of what I research is the wider understanding of actually what a childminder is. So I suppose I won't wrap it up in glitter. Registering as a childminder is actually quite a tough process, but then I think that I would argue that it should be, because of the nature of the job. It can take about 6 months to register as a childminder. You have to get your DBS, your Ofsted registered. You have to look at your home and make sure that it's suitable and appropriate as a childcare setting. You obviously need a certain degree of, resources and a level of understanding about the EYFS. So that is the early years foundation stage. So the curriculum that we use in early years to guide children's development. And I think one of the difficult things is at this point, when you're registering as a childminder, you're largely doing it on your own. There is some support and guidance from the local authority, and there's loads of information online and all those sorts of things, but ultimately you are setting up a business. Childminders are self-employed. They are the accountants, they're the setting policy writers, they're first aid trained, they're safeguarding officers, you're the SENCO and the ENCO and all of that type of thing. And I don't want that to sound overwhelming for anyone who is thinking of being a childminder, of course. That there's support and there's guidance and things out there. And in my experience, there are also other childminders who are really willing to help and advise and everything. But ultimately, I think the freedom that you have as a self-employed childminder to educate, to care for children in whichever way that they need it, makes it all really worth it. Childminding it allows such an individual approach to childcare that you could just not achieve in other types of group settings. You're just working, with 3 children under 5, mainly, while the others are at school during a normal sort of term time day. So you can really support them. You can, for example, if a child is interested in trains, you can go take them on a train. You're not kind of bound by the walls of a building or a setting. I think one of my most memorable memories actually was one of my children was really interested in trains, and we got all the trains out and we built the train tracks and all of those normal things that you would do. But then we also got on a train and we used that as a whole experience, and we went to Liverpool Street and we had to look around all of this, this big, huge station, and we had lunch in Liverpool Street, and then we hopped on a train and we came back again and did the school run. So it was this is the thing for me, I think, about childminding. The value is really in those true real world life experiences. And the opportunity for children to just be involved in their community. As I said, you're not tied to that particular space or that building. My mindees, they all had library cards, and we had annual passes to you know, every zoo and farm and place of interest that you could possibly imagine.
Yeah.
I used to love beach days. Like we said at the beginning, obviously all of this is done from a base of a very small, a very safe and a loving home environment.
Yeah.
And so that gives the children the confidence to then be able to, you know, make the most out of their time. And there are so many unique benefits for children being raised in a childminding setting. There are other, maybe sort of more hidden aspects of childminding that are not as visible out there in the literature and things. Obviously, children learn in mixed ages, and that means that they can really start to develop their empathy and their relationships across a wider group of children.
Yeah.
But there are some other aspects. So, for example, you know that we have gender issues in childcare, and we have a severe lack of men. I think it's about 98% of the early years workforce is female.
Wow, that
and
high.
Yeah, it's crazy, and that applies to childminders. But what the difference is, that's not in the statistics, is when those children are in a childminder's home, there is very often a husband there, or an older brother there, or other male people that end up being role models in a kind of, you know, in a different sort of way. So there's other anecdotal benefits of being in a childminding setting. And of course, you know, when you register as a childminder, everybody in your home has to be DBS checked, and many childminders work with their husbands as assistants and things like that too. So these are all the kind of nuances of childminding that we don't necessarily talk about, because we're so focused on trying to really start at the beginning and explain what a childminder is and how they work and those sorts of things. And obviously, you know, things like continuity of care and consistency. You are the only key worker. You are the one that sees that child at 7 o'clock in the morning. You say goodbye to them at 7 o'clock at night, and you build those really strong relationships, but not just with the child, with their families as well. You know, you spend a lot of time with those families, and because of the nature of childminding, many of them turn into friends along the way. And I know that some of the childminders that I've worked with that have been childminding for a really long time, they have seen children from birth all the way through to sort of 14, 15, when they stop needing to, you know, come around after school anymore. But and I think also the other thing for me is that I really believe that my children gained a lot from it as well. It wasn't just a means to an end so that I could stay at home with my children. You know, they gave up a lot. They gave up their home. They gave up their toys. They had to share my attention with all of these other children. But I can see now with hindsight that they are so kind and compassionate because of it. And we got to be at home together during that time. And that's something that's really valuable. I've been very lucky to be able to raise both my children at home in slightly different ways. But as I said earlier, in a way that, you know, allowed me also to build my career and to grow as a person, as well as giving my children the best start in life that I could.
I think so much of what you've said around childminding really, for me, really kind of resonates with the work that I do with home education, and how being able to have that experiential learning and being able to really consolidate the learning that you're doing within the four walls and then taking it outside, and like you say, going on a train and experiencing being on a train and going somewhere. And that's what a lot of the families that I speak to in my research around home education, that's something they really value, is the fact that they can follow an interest of their child, and whether they're following a particular curriculum or not, they can take that and make like an interest-based project around it, and they can go and, like you're saying, you know, library cards and visit to the beach and going to the farms and things like that, and actually being able to get out there and learn in a real life context. And I feel like there's a bit of overlap and alignment between kind of that element of childminding and those families that then go on to home educate.
Yeah, absolutely, you're completely right. And I think, you know, it's putting the textbook into reality, isn't it? We've got too many worksheets and classrooms in our lives, and if we really truly believe that that the period of being a child is, it's short in the grand scheme of things, and we keep them in one room for most of it. And I'm not going to argue educational theory or anything, but I think that there is room for being able to look at that slightly differently and think a bit more creatively about alternatives to worksheets and theoretical learning, and thinking about how, there are many communities internationally all over the world that educate children in this way, and they value the child's contribution to the community and learning through these real world experiences. And sometimes, there is an element of, there is compromise. You can do that in a classroom instead of buying a plastic saucepan and a role play kitchen kit. You can have the real thing. I didn't ever hardly need to buy any resources as a childminder. There wasn't if we wanted to role play kitchens, we went in the kitchen. That's kind of, but you can you can recreate that with real world resources, can't you? Which a lot of settings are sort of doing these days. But childminding is definitely closer to what you're experiencing and the type of education that you're providing as a home-based educator than the schooling system and group-based settings.
And I think as well, because it's something that I always say, because when people find out what area I research in, I think people always assume that I'm anti-mainstream school and that I'm pioneering for all of this alternatives, and because I don't like mainstream school. And that's absolutely not the case at all. And I always say I'm not anti-mainstream, I'm pro-education, and education to every family and every child will look different. So what I kind of campaign for is having the alternatives available for those who want an alternative. But actually, worksheets and working in a classroom and going to mainstream school and things like that, that works for a lot of families and a lot of children, and they thrive in that environment, and that's brilliant. But for the ones that don't, there should be an alternative available. And I think it's just, for me, it's acknowledging that everybody learns differently and everybody develops differently and everyone has different learning styles. So me, for instance, I work very well with this kind of experiential learning, and I can sit and read in a textbook, but if I can then apply that in a practical context and practice a skill, I will learn it and retain it so much more than if I'm just reading it from a slide or a textbook. So I know that as my learning type, I need that element of experiential learning. So about childminding, I love that you have the opportunity at that such young age to be able to build in those real life learning experiences as everyday practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the similarity for me in the same vein is that I'm not anti group settings. As childminders, we work very closely with group settings, and they are valuable for children in different ways, to be able to give children that experience of being in an environment where there's lots of children and not just another two and one person and things like that. And there is increasingly more and more examples of group settings working more creatively and being able to take children outside of the building and sort of replicating. But equally, childminders look to group settings to some degree as well to share practice and to see to see examples of good practice. So I think it's more about taking what we know as the very best practice and utilizing that in the settings that we're in. And that's one of the really good aspects of childcare. Unlike school settings, it's not a postcode lottery. Parents and families can choose an early year setting of whatever style, in whatever place that they want. And because we have a variety in early childhood, it means that there is usually always something that is most appropriate for that family. And there are some real strengths. You will have childminders that are from a particular culture. You might have bilingual childminders, and that might be what that particular child and that particular family needs. And so it just enhances the kind of flexibility and the variety that's available to families, in this for their children.
Yeah, definitely. So You, as we said, you completed your doctorate, which actually focused on childminders and continued professional development, CPD, which is amazing. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work with your doctorate? And for anyone who's unfamiliar with the term CPD, what that means in the context of for childminders?
Yes, of course. So I completed my doctorate in 2021. So I was finishing it off as we went into COVID,
Oh,
um, online, and I was, yeah, I was one of the first people to have my Viva online. These were all sort of
oh,
really new experiences at that time. Yeah, you'll be there soon, Lucy. But so my doctorate, it was an action research project, and you're right, it focused on exploring CPD with childminders. So CPD is continuous professional development, and that in itself is quite a broad term.
yeah,
There are so many different forms of CPD. It could be anything from reading a professional article in a magazine and learning something, all the way through to formal study or training workshops. They are one of the most common forms of CPD. You know, where you go on a workshop for a couple of hours and
yeah.
you learn about a particular topic and you get a certificate at the end, and then that's it. You go back to your setting and now you know about that particular particular topic. And that was my experience of CPD primarily when I was a childminder. Um, I was really lucky when I was childminding to work with the most amazing, supportive group of childminders. I lived in an area where we all worked from our own homes, so we all had our own individual childminding settings, but we took the children out together, and
Right.
we were able to do lots of stuff that maybe I wouldn't have been able to do if I was just working on my own. So, for example, we organised sports days, we did charity fundraising events and picnics and all those kind of other things. And we also used to have meetings together. We used to go on CPD courses together, and they were the CPD that we engaged with. It was informative and it kept us up to date. As you can imagine, being that single self-employed childminder, you have that responsibility to keep up to date
Yeah.
with policy, with all of the changes that are happening in the sector. So you need to be able to engage with those opportunities to find out that information. But over the course of the time when I was childminding, we started to see that the impact of, funding was dwindling. There
Mm.
started to become a bit more of a lack of opportunities. Um, and when you're self-employed, it's quite difficult to keep up with everything on your own. And there are new initiatives all of the time.
Yeah, of
1 minute
course.
it's mud kitchens, and the next minute it's forest schools, and everyone's now talking about self-regulation. And I think it's reflective of the fact that the early years sector as a body of knowledge is quite new. So in comparison to historical things like law and medicine that have been studied for a long time, early years has only really just started to be recognised as a studyable body of knowledge that we're still trying to learn about and contribute to and try out and things. And we're also doing that in a world that is changing really quickly.
Yeah.
And family needs are changing, children's needs are changing. Mental health is probably one of the most common examples of that, as well as technology. And childminders are essentially a frontline service. They're the ones that are working with that child, with that family,
Yeah.
right at that point of when they need the early intervention. So it's a huge responsibility for childminders to be able to keep up with all of that and learn about that and professionally develop.
Mhm.
So I had been working with the childminders, and we had been going on the CPD courses, and at the same time I had started my masters. So I had gone back to Anglia Ruskin. I was doing my masters. I had done my early years initial teacher training. It was the EYPS then. So it was the government introduced this concept of having a graduate-led workforce.
Yeah.
So we kind of upskilled to be able to recognise that we had those leadership qualities. But because childminding is so flexible, I was also able to do that. I was able to reduce my days, to have a day at uni a week. I actually worked quite closely with the childminders that I knew, and they helped out. So we had an agreement with the parents
that's
that
good.
the other childminders would be able to look after my mindees and my own children as well. One day a week through the trimester, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the other, I suppose that's the other kind of hidden flexibility of childminding that, again, we don't always see in the literature, is that it allows you to develop in a way that you want to.
Yeah.
But so I was doing all of this. We were going to networking events, we were going to CPD sessions, but we were also noticing that there was a lot of challenges around that. And it kind of, after a while, once you'd been doing it for 2, 3, 4 years, it sort of tended to be the same courses, and
right.
much of it was held during the day. And obviously, group settings, maybe not so much now, but they can afford to release a person to be able to go on a CPD course during the day.
Yeah.
Whereas childminders can't do that. They're self-employed, and they're the only person that is, if they can't work, then all of those parents can't work either. And it was kind of run by people who knew about early years, but it wasn't quite tailored to the distinctiveness of a home-based setting. So we were kind of finding that we very often had to kind of interpret the examples into our more unique home-based childminding approach, probably a bit like you experience with tailoring education into a home kind of educating environment. And CPD specifically this is all underpinned by a official requirement in the EYFS, in the statutory guidance for childminders, to be responsible for their professional development and to source appropriate opportunities to professionally develop. So the importance of it is recognised there by policymakers, by the wider society, but actually being able to do that in a really valuable way, that's where my kind of research interest started. And I sort of won't go into it too much, but my research was designed really to work collaboratively with the childminders. So I wanted to work with them to explore these challenges and see if we could find some solutions, or maybe think about CPD slightly differently.
Yeah.
And by this time, I wasn't childminding anymore. So by the time I actually started to carry out my research and do this with the childminders, I was now working at ARU as a senior lecturer, teaching the early childhood course that I had previously done, and working with you, Lucy, and and all of that that kind of thing. So this was a really exciting opportunity for me to be able to do. So essentially, I met with the childminders for one evening a month over the course of about 10 months, and we started to work together to look at how we might be able to look at CPD and engage with it in a slightly different way. So we ended up offering CPD. So I used to run CPD with the childminders as part of my own kind of leadership in the UIT programme, and the childminders had said that they wanted me to continue to do that. So I did, but the difference was we ended up reflecting on it and being able to evaluate it and be able to engage then with CPD in a slightly different way. So we ended up looking at 3 different topics. So it was still topic based. We looked at schemas, we looked at attachment theory, we looked at international approaches to early years. But rather than just talking about it for a couple of hours and then having a certificate and then going off into the setting, as part of the action research, the childminders then went back into their settings. They started to implement and to observe and to document some of the things that they had learnt during that session, some of the ideas that they'd taken away and some of the kind of inspirations that they'd had. And so then when we met again the next month, rather than then doing another CPD session, we just devoted that entire session to reflecting on what they had done and talking about what they had observed. They had the opportunity to ask questions because, as you know, until you actually go and start to do it, that's when the questions start to come up. And these were the most amazing sessions. They were supporting each other, they were sharing practice, and I was learning just as much from them as, you know, they had learned in the more formal sort of CPD workshops. So we did this process 3 times with the 3 different themes, and then through that we were able to kind of design this 3-stage model of CPD, where you have the CPD session, you have time to implement it in practice, but then you close the loop by coming back and reflecting and evaluating and being able to consolidate it afterwards. And so that was the real kind of outcome from my research, I suppose. And what was important to me was this was our research, you know, this was working together as a group of childminders. And although I still feel like I am one, and I know that I'm not, we were able to look at this. We were able to look at this together. And so we ended up by offering kind of out 5 key elements of CPD. So we saw that the content needed to be tailored and appropriate to the type of setting, you know, to the distinctive approach that childminders have in a home-based setting. And it also needed to be delivered by someone who was able to do that and was able to give real examples in those types of settings. But it was interesting, actually, that it was the childminders that recognised at that point that it's childminders that need to upskill and to be able to become trainers and to be able to be part of this process, which I thought was really wonderful. And then through this whole thing, you know, the effect that they said that they reported that it had on them was that they were motivated and they were more inspired and empowered and everything. But finally, really, just to finish it off, is that it's the effect of our collaborative working together that I think was the most significant. And we had, although we were focusing on CPD, what we had actually started to do was to begin to form a network and a community of practice. And that's the bit that I believe was the most important outcome from the research, maybe even more so than the actual model of CPD.
It's really interesting, actually, listen to you explain all about this research, because I think it's easy to assume that childminders, because it's quite a solitary, like you said, it's quite a solitary role to have. So it's easy to think that it's a solitary role and that there isn't that sense of community. But based on what you're saying, there is definitely that sense of community there, and to be able to nurture that and grow that community, I think is key, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're trying to look at now through the Childminder Cafe, is how we continue to keep that up and running.
Yeah, so tell us more about the Childminder Cafe, because I love the sound of this.
Okay, yes. So the Childminder Cafe. So I suppose after doing all of that work with the childminders, you know, and having all of these wonderful inspirational moments and spending all of this time with them for what was essentially my doctoral action research, they had been able to really put forward some really kind of important points for them. And that's the point of an ED, really, isn't it? That's the difference in it, is you're not just making a contribution to knowledge, you are making a contribution to practice. And so I didn't want to just stop and say, well, thanks very much, you know, there clearly is a need to bring childminders together and to be able to explore their professional development needs together, to be able to kind of write and showcase what they're doing and what they're thinking, so that maybe we can sort of start to build upon this network and this community of practice that we had started. And ultimately, it would enable their voices to be more visible in the sector and contribute to that wider change. And it is still early days, you know, it's got lots of potential, but there are also challenges in what we did, I think my doctoral research was it was pre-COVID. So now, with all of the digital advancements and all of us living half of our lives online, that now kind of provides additional opportunities for childminders to be able to engage.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the greatest challenges that we saw through the research was the time that it takes. You're asking a lot of childminders to work from 7 in the morning until 7 at night, and then go on a CPD session in the evening. Most of them, as we know, are parents, so they're also trying to organise their own children and their families and their lives and everything together. So the challenge of the time and the engagement is a real sticking point for how do you create a community of practice in a workforce that is so busy and time poor. So this is really what we're looking at the moment. Can we now, they all want to come together, they see the value of the network and the community of practice, but we're now just sort of starting to explore, can we do this slightly different? Can we make this slightly easier for everybody? It might be that we have a session online, maybe for an actual CPD session that is kind of taught as an online workshop, and then we use that time to get together for that second part of the process of being able to talk about it and have those rich conversations and share that learning process. So I hope that the Childminder Cafe will sort of grow, but it also needs to adapt, and that's really why it's important that we're working on it together and it's a collaborative effort.
Is this something that any childminder can get involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, because I have been working so closely with, the particular group of childminders, we have been working to see how we might be able to expand this opportunity out. So, for example, there's a Facebook group, or everybody's invited, that type of thing. But I don't really know how many people are on Facebook these days. This is part of what we're looking at. How do you start to get out to people? Is this something that people are interested in? Sometimes things like this need to be done at a local level, and there are other initiatives in other local authority areas. But that's all part of what the next stage of the research will be. Really, is looking at what the need is out there and looking at who wants to be involved. And there's more people involved now in the Childminder Cafe than there was in the original research. So it's kind of growing slightly.
Yeah, fantastic. Every step is a step forward, no matter how small, isn't it? So as long as it continues to grow and raise awareness, that's brilliant. What can people do? So if people are listening to this and thinking, this is a great initiative, what can I do to help, even if they're kind of not childminders themselves, but help to kind of raise awareness, raise the profile, and help with people's understanding of how important this workforce is to childcare?
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. And I think that's exactly it. That's what people need to do. I think for me, I would like to see a bit of a shift towards valuing the early years as a profession. And that's quite a hard narrative to break down, because it's been in existence for so long, that the traditional sort of babysitting from the Industrial Revolution, that was the original form of childcare. But childminding, nursery settings, private settings, they have existed now in their current Ofsted regulated, DFE guided form since the mid 1990s. So they've existed for quite a long period of time now, and there's a bit of a disconnect between society's views of what the early years is and where they have developed to. And I see it everywhere, whether it's higher education, whether it's schools, whether it's general public, childminding and early years is still thought of as just playing. And even that is a point of contention in itself. Or even worse, the other side of that is that it becomes over schoolified, and people try to formalise it too much to give it that professional status. And that is just as dangerous as not valuing it for what it is. And you end up with 4-year-olds sitting at desks for hours doing adult-led activities, and that's just as worrying. So I think my plea would be to just give the sector the respect that it deserves as a profession, to understand that it has a body of knowledge that underpins it, to know that it's crucial that childminders and the rest of the sector, they need support, they need that understanding of the important job that they do. And I suppose if you think about what we were talking about at the beginning of what it's like to be a parent and how important these little children are,
Yeah.
then the early years are the ones that hold that responsibility of being able to give children the best start in life.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose I would ask people to value the sector and to maybe just help create a bit of a movement towards recognition.
Absolutely. I think that is brilliant. And hopefully, the more people talk about it, the more things are available for people to read, watch, understand, discuss, talk about. It's all working towards the same thing, isn't it? But like you say, these are well-read narratives that have been in place for a long time. So it's not an overnight thing to change people's opinions on things and people's understanding of things. But I think awareness is key in things like this. So talking about it and getting it out there is super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to finish up, so because Recap's all about embracing everyone, making everyone feel at home and part of a supportive community, I do ask all guests to have a think of just a little piece of advice or an empowering message to give to our listeners to help share that love and support. So if you could say one thing to help even just one person, what would you like to say?
Thank you, Lucy. So I think that my message goes back to what I was talking about at the start of this podcast, in the fact that childhood goes so quickly and we are living in such a fast-paced world now. My piece of advice would be to remember to give children your time and not your phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that that message might just help children and adults to reconnect and to go back to those really important relationships that we have said are, underpin that best start in life that children need.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that's a really important message to put out there. Kate, thank you so much for coming on and talking today. Your research is so important and so well needed, I think. So I love that you're out there pioneering for this support for this really important and valuable workforce. So please do keep us up to date of anything that's developing and anything that we can help with in terms of support, sharing, talking about it, anything like that. Please do keep us up to date with it, because I'd love to keep people informed of how they can help.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to come and talk to you today as well, Lucy. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I wish you all the best for Recap as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kate. It was good to speak to you. Take care.
Thanks, Lucy. Bye-bye.